Thought Bubble Audio.
Look, up in the sky!
You will never find the more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
Welcome to Beer with Geeks with Tim and Frank.
Who are you?
I'm Batman.
I am Iron Man.
Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Hi, Christopher. I'm Nero.
My name is Inigo Montoya.
You're a wizard, Harry.
A couple of guys with a couple of beers and a whole lot of pop culture nostalgia.
Make it so, number one.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
Named the dog Indiana.
Life finds a way.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Now sit back and crack open a cold one, because it's time for Beer with Geeks.
It comes in paints.
Shaken, not stirred.
Great Scott!
I was way off. I knew it started with an S, though.
Hi, and welcome to Beer with Geeks, where two geeks geek out with beer. I'm Tim, and with me, as always, is my man who prefers to look at a TV over reading a book. It's Frank. How are you today?
I'm taking a break from the television to make time for you, my friend.
Woo! That's so nice.
Yeah.
Although you still have to look at a screen to do it.
I guess that's true, but that's more of a pandemic thing. You know, that's just...
No, I just changed my head out for this new flat screen TV.
Oh, I thought you looked different. So it is the
Yeah.
haircut.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean,
Technically.
now the wig just sits on top of the flat screen.
Sure.
So I got a flat top cut, obviously,
right.
to keep everything symmetrical.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
just ask you to bring me pictures of Spider-Man from time to time.
Sure. So it's going to be one of those episodes, huh? Okay, cool. Just good to know up front, just to know what I'm dealing with. It's one of those weeks, kids.
Do you have like a little tally down there where you're like, Tim off his rocker? Like, drink faster.
Make him drink faster.
Yeah.
Catch up with him. What are you drinking, though?
I'm drinking a Leffe.
Blonde ale.
Yeah, blonde ale. Good old Belgian blonde ale. 1240. This beer is not from 1240, but the recipe sure is. And it's good. I've had it every couple of weeks or so here on this show, but I'm looking to broaden my horizons at the store soon, Frank. So get ready for a new wave of beer that you'll be sick of hearing about in a couple of weeks.
I'm excited for that. I'm excited to be sick of those. I am drinking one that's it's also kind of new to me. This is a Nikita Russian Imperial Stout.
Oh, it's an assassin.
Yes, it is. It is or Khrushchev, depending on
Khrushchev. Yeah, that's fine.
But yeah, it is actually it is named for Khrushchev, so there you go. But it's from Rising Tide Brewing. Rising Tide.
Oh, sure.
Is out of Portland, Maine. Significant to me because we went there after it was like an after party for my wedding, which was a lot of fun. And I was just there this past weekend and picked up a 4-pack of this one because I tried it there and really liked it. So yeah, Nikita Rye Russian Imperial Stout from Rising Tide Brewing in Portland, Maine.
Oh, I like that. Not the bottle. The can is very cool.
Very cool. Yeah, it's named. Okay, so apparently originally they named it Sputnik 2, and then they renamed it Nikita for Nikita Khrushchev, who was the premier of the Soviet Union when Sputnik happened.
Gotcha. Okay, I like Nikita more. Yeah, Sputnik 2. Yeah, it's fine. Nikita. That's a cool name.
Renaming it was the right call, I think.
I think it also brought about a conversation, which Sputnik 2 really wouldn't, right?
Right.
Sputnik 2, you'd be like, yeah, so it's named after, this is the second Sputnik. Are you going to send it into space?
Yeah, right? Like, that's kind of where the conversation ends. But Nikita, yeah, you're like, oh, is it like Leffe Nikita? Is it Nikita Khrushchev? Is it, okay, it's Nikita Khrushchev. Oh, it's because it's Sputnik.
Yeah, I went with Leffe Nikita. That was my first thought. So, again, there you go. Establishing conversation.
Yeah, there we go. So, what if I feel like it's been a while since we've caught up on like things that we're watching, things that we're reading. I've actually done a bit of reading lately. You joked at the beginning that I like to watch things more than I like to read, but which is true. But I've kind of been in the mood to read lately, and so I've been doing a ton of reading, and I actually I was really lucky. A couple weeks ago, I was able to just take a weekend to myself and just sort of like grab a couple books, grab my work computer, and go out on my own, hang out by a lake, pretty much completely alone. I saw only a couple other human faces for a couple days. And I did some work on a weekend to catch up and spent the evenings reading by a fire, and it was great. It was great. It was just what I needed. And I got to catch up on some I've been into like the classics lately, like some stuff going way back and trying to read more like philosophy and things like that to make my brain bigger. So I've been trying to make time to do that where I can, and in big ways and little ways. I read a couple books on that little weekend outing, and then been trying to be like, let me just like always have a book that I'm reading like on my lunch break or whatever. And I've been pretty good about that.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. That's very I'm supremely jealous of your weekend to yourself. Like
that is not a thing I get to do very often, to be clear.
That's not a thing most people get to do
Right.
very often.
Right.
That's not a thing
Right.
I've never gotten to do that. That's not a thing that will ever happen in my life. So good for you.
I don't know if I'll ever get to do that again, so I'm glad I got to do it at least the once.
Yeah.
And it was a work thing. I mean, it really was like a little work retreat for myself, but I worked during the day and then got to do some reading at night. I was trying to limit my screen time actually during that weekend, and like not looking at my phone a bunch, not having podcasts playing in the background or music playing, like just being very intentional about like, if I'm going to turn on a screen, it's for a reason, but I'm not just going to have ambient noise or ambient, stuff going on in the background.
Good for you.
It was great to be able to experience the silence up at the lake.
Yeah.
It was really nice.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did you read on your expedition?
So like I said, this is going to sound so pretentious because it's the classics. But it's stuff that I had never gotten a chance to read and always wanted to. Starting with Dante's Inferno. Never read Dante's Inferno. I wrote
many people haven't. Little known fact.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, I wrote a paper about Dante in like senior year of high school. But it was like a biographical paper. It wasn't on his works.
Did you talk about his theory of vernacular rhetoric in your paper at all?
Sure I did. I don't remember, but I'm sure
you want to talk pretension? Let's talk about that.
Sure.
So anyways,
let's talk vernacular rhetoric. Yeah, why not?
Dante's theory of vernacular rhetoric was the way that he think like this is the good way to analyze stories. You know, where you're looking at the allegorical meaning, the plot, the religious meaning, the title, the ending. Does it mean anything? The author's life. We kind of still without anybody knowing it, like we pretty much still use a good chunk of it today.
I was going to say that sounds like Supergirl TV talk.
That's basically it's basically how we still analyze stories today.
That's cool.
Yeah,
it was a really enlightening read. Now I want to read the rest of the Divine Comedy. So the Purgatory.
Oh, so you made it through. You made it through the Inferno.
I finished the Inferno. Yeah.
I read the Inferno. Good. What was your favorite circle of hell?
Weird question. I rather liked. I think it was now they blend together in my mind because I read it all at once. But I think
right.
Like the seventh-ish, where you had like some like monks and popes and stuff who were like clapping back at each other. I thought that was kind of funny that
you said clapping back at each other, and the first thing that popped into my head was a bunch of monks and popes with erasers, like clapping them together, like clapping the dust.
After school, at the university,
exactly, clapping back at one. Yeah, of course. Interesting. Dante's. So, did you find it accessible?
Not really. Not. Yeah. I mean, that's why I feel like this is kind of a pretentious conversation, but I'm going with it anyway. I think it's not as accessible as something like I don't know, Orwell or something is that's more current, more 20th century. It's harder to read. But that said, there are lots of translations. The one that I picked it because it was written in Italian and you can get a translation.
And so you read it in the classic. You obviously read it in the Italian,
in the original Klingon. I picked one that went for keeping it still in like a poetic verse, with rhyming where possible, and and that kind of thing. But there are other translations where it's like, here's more of a literal translation that's just in every, plain English, easy to read, and doesn't bother with like still trying to make it sound lyrical and poetic. It's just here are the words so you can understand them. I went with one that was more of like, well, we're translating it, but it's still going to be sort of a lyrical verse to it so that it still feels like a poem. And I liked that. For me, I liked that. I actually, after I finished reading it, I've been listening to an audio on Audible. There was like a course that like breaks it down. So I like listened to it and then I read it and then I listened to this course that broke it down afterwards to help me break down the pieces. And I was like, oh man, I feel silly that I need someone to explain this book to me. And then I was like, that's what school is. That's what
school is. That is correct.
So I'm not embarrassed of that because that's just school. That's correct. That's just taking a class, basically, is what I did. So
that's correct.
Yeah.
I mean, if you read Clifford the Big Red Dog and you need to take a class on it, I would be worried for you.
Sure.
But
sure.
One of the more complicated pieces of literature in the world. Yeah, I think that's
having
okay
someone break it down was helpful. Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah, context, history.
Yep.
These things matter.
Right. Because like he throws out so many names of people who he meets in the various circles of hell, and it's like, who were they? Some of them, it's like, okay, Virgil's a famous name. I can Google that one. But then when it's just like some random Italian man whose the name doesn't ring a bell, it's like, oh, what we need to know is that Dante was from Florence, and this was somebody who was famous in Florence at that time. It's like, oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah. Was he a random Italian man or a rambling Italian man?
That would be me.
That would be you.
So that's something that I started with. But what about you? What have you been reading or watching? Or
Frank, I've been reading some Star Wars books to go in the non-pretentious side of things. I could go pretentious if you want me to, but
no, it's okay.
But I'll get there. I'll get there. Have I talked? I can't remember if I've actually talked about them on the podcast before. The High Republic Star Wars stuff.
I've heard you talk about them on Read Up, and I don't remember if much has come up on this show, to be honest.
Okay. So the High Republic is the Star Wars initiative it's comics, it's books, it's gonna be TV shows. That's what the Acolyte show is coming our way and all that stuff. That's all 200 years before the Phantom Menace, when like the galaxy is like doing its thing. It's fine. The Senate is grooving. It's in a good place, and space pirates are attacking everybody. And it's been a ball. I've really been enjoying it. They've really been thinking about how to tell an effective story with a bunch of new characters. And it's been working. Like, I mean, Yoda's there. Like he crops up from here to there depending on the story that you're reading, but he's probably the only one that anybody would recognize. But there was Light of the Jedi, which was the adult novel, which was good. It was a little slow. It was a little slow at times. It was definitely like we have to really set up what is happening in Star Wars, so like everything else makes sense.
Sure,
it has that kind of going for it. But I also read Into the Dark by Claudia Gray, which is the young adult novel.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and that one I supremely recommend, because the main character is just like, it's almost typical young adult, but in a Star Wars setting. So it's like the main character is a Padawan, but he was like, I kind of just want to stay on Coruscant and work in the library because I like books, but my master is making me go out to basically what is the Wild West of space, the Outer Territories, and like I have to go do that instead. And so it's almost like the nerdy Padawan, like learning that he can also be a Jedi, like a real, like, on the front lines Jedi. And it was really entertaining. Plus they had to charter a ship to get there. I won't go into the details, but the captain is basically 90s Matthew McConaughey. Right. So imagine imagine Han Solo played by Matthew McConaughey. And you've kind of got your like, hey, the princess, all right. Yeah. Like that's
interesting.
It was a good character, but he's got his shipmate is a character called Geode, which is just a rock that doesn't talk or walk.
Oh,
but if you know how to read him, like you can read, like they'll be like, oh no, Geo likes it, and it will be like Geo.
So it's kind of like how they know how to talk to R2 or Chewie or whatever.
Kind of, except that The Rock makes zero sounds, and he's like, yeah, he likes it. Yeah, so it was real fun. It was so fun. Like it was such a I was like, this could be really dumb or it could be great, and it was great. So and then there's the comic. There's a 6-issue comic that Marvel's pumping out right now that's also going, and they all kind of tie around the same story, so you don't have to read all of them to know what's happening, but you do get a big scope of the story.
Nice.
So I've been doing some Star Wars. This was a while ago actually that I read these, but I can get more current with the times.
Cool.
Frank, what else have you been up to?
I just want to make sure I caught all of those. So Light of the Jedi and Into the Dark are the two the novels you mentioned.
Yes.
And then the High Republic comics.
Yes, and there's like a middle school book and like little kid books, but I figure that if you're old enough to be listening to a show called Beer with Geeks, you probably don't want to read the middle school book.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
But I'm putting links to all of these in the show notes for folks who are interested, and from there you can get links to anything else if you want to, read the
middle school book is called
the
middle school book is called A Test of Courage if you want to. Right, it's by Justina Ireland, and so in the writers, it's like they're all mixing and matching, so like they all work together. But the guy who writes the comic is also wrote the second adult Star Wars book, and the guy who wrote that one is also writing a young adult book, and so you're getting a mix of all of these writers together, which is pretty cool. Mm-hmm.
I like that a lot. That's a cool way to do it. I'm gonna go with something unpretentious this time. And this one is something I think you would enjoy. And actually, I watched this off a recommendation from our mutual friend Dan. The Last Blockbuster on Netflix.
Oh, I haven't watched that yet.
You're gonna like it. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, it's on Netflix. It's called The Last Blockbuster, and it follows the story of Blockbuster Video over the last few years, and it sort of ends honing in on this famous last existing Blockbuster in Bend, Oregon. That is the last one that's there. But it seems like they started making this documentary before it was down to just one. So they were following around the owners, managers of a couple of Blockbusters. And I think they were setting out to tell the story of Blockbuster as a company, like just sort of start to finish. And they do a little bit. They cover the start of it, and
did they cover the bit about how Blockbuster was going to buy Netflix, and they were like, nah.
That was brought up, yes.
Yep.
So they talk about all of that stuff, but then it quickly, because they happened to be, and actually the filmmakers are from Bend, Oregon, so they were very invested in the story of this very last Blockbuster, and so the story sort of pivots and focuses on them finding out they're the last ones left, them trying to figure out if they can stay in business, which I won't spoil what happens there, but it's a lot. It's a really good watch. And
I worked there, so I could actually probably tell you because the way the company was set up, but I won't spoil it. I don't want to spoil it.
I think you would. That's why I think you'd find it interesting because of your connection to it. So I liked it a lot. It's a big love letter to Blockbuster in particular, and video stores in general, as a place to mix and mingle and be, and as a thing that we miss in our lives today. And the filmmakers clearly have a point of view on missing that nostalgia, and they pull in like all sorts of comedians and famous people. I mean, you got Kevin Smith there talking about how much he fell in love with movies at Blockbuster, and Kumail Nanjiani's not in it, but other comedian friends of his are mentioned, and Doug Benson is in it and mentions Kumail, and actually there's a funny moment where he texts something to Kumail. I'll tell you this is not a spoiler, but Doug Benson was part of this production, and they brought him to the last Blockbuster, and when he got to the last Blockbuster, he took a picture and saw that, I guess this was right after Kumail and Emily's The Big Sick had come out on DVD, and Doug was tickled because he's friends with Kumail and Emily. Was tickled that that there was a big end cap display for the Big Sick, and so he texted a picture of it to Kumail and was like, "Dude, you're at the last, like your face is all over the place in the last Blockbuster on Earth." And Kumail was like, like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it! Like that's so cool! Like what a cool claim to fame!" Because like how much Kumail loves movies, right? And
of course.
And so yeah, I love that. That's a fun representation of like just how. It reminded me a lot of like the there was a Tower Records documentary a couple of years ago, and this
yes
reminded me very much of the same kind of like, oh yeah, there's a love letter to this thing, that this moment that defined a couple generations and is no longer really a thing, and it was a really fun telling of that story through the eyes of the people who work at this final last Blockbuster.
Just waiting on my Borders book documentary, and I'll complete the trifecta.
Honestly, that's probably not too far behind.
Yeah, really.
But that's a good one. It's just a movie. It's less than 2 hours. You can watch it in a night. So yeah, that's a recommendation for me.
That's good. I want to hop back to books for a second because I haven't talked about these on Read Up, but I read Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles and Circe, which is her retelling of some Greek myths. So the first one is her retelling of the Iliad through Patroclus's point of view, which is depending on your translation, it's like either like Achilles' cousin, it's his friend, it's his lover, it's like a lot of different things. And so it's basically their buildings Roman story, it's their coming of age story, but it's the Iliad through Patroclus, right? And so instead of the great hero and the narrative, it's just like this guy that's like, okay, there he goes, the best that there ever was, going off to war and blah blah blah. And it was really interesting. I liked it quite a bit. And I also read Circe, which is the retelling of the myth of, well, kind of the Odyssey. So I grouped them together because the Song of Achilles is the Iliad, and Circe is kind of the Odyssey in that Circe is a nymph that lives on an island that Odysseus goes to on his like journey back to Ithaca in the Odyssey. And so, but that's only a part of the story. It's like, I wouldn't say that it's the whole thing, but if you wanted to read them together, you're really getting a whole picture, because obviously Odysseus is also in the Iliad. And so, in Song of Achilles, because Odysseus fought in the Trojan War. They were terrific, though. Like, I thought they were, like, awards this, bestsellers this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, yeah, all right, it's on the bestseller list. Yeah, but what isn't on the bestseller list?
Yeah.
Show me that. Sometimes, it's like, oh, yeah, #1 movie in the world. Okay, yeah, that's fine. What else is there?
What else is there? Give me something indie.
Right, kind of. Sometimes it's like that, and so. But I was like, I've had them for a while, so I was like, I'm gonna buckle down. I'm gonna read, and I read a Song of Achilles thoroughly, and I devoured Circe.
Nice.
It was so good. It was like, whereas kind of like the Song of Achilles is this coming of age story, so is Circe definitely. But where you've got I don't want to spoil too much, but
sure.
The Song of Achilles is basically, it's the story of a gay kid, being accepted by like the greatest hero, like the greatest warrior on the planet, and their connection. And then you have Circe, who is, it's kind of the story of like femininity, toxic masculinity, fifth wave, fourth or fifth wave feminism, but it's all through Circe and who she is as a person. And it was really, really well done.
That is such an interesting, like, we've seen the sort of thing where you take a well-known story and tell it from a different character's perspective, like make a different side character the POV character.
Sure, like Wicked is a great example of that, right? It's the Wizard of Oz from the Wicked Witch's story, perspective.
But I love that. Sounds like a really interesting take, and sprinkling in some other aspects of it that make it more pertinent to a modern audience, maybe.
Right. What works is because it's not just retelling the story.
Right.
It's about something. So there's always the plot, and then there's the narrative. And so the plot is just what happens in the story, and the narrative is what is the story about? What is it trying to teach you? What does it want to say about the world in the context that it was written in? Blah blah blah, and all this stuff.
Sure.
And it says a lot, and it is good because it is comparing. You're looking at ancient practices, the way men treat women, the way that men treat men, whatever else, and you can't help but compare that to your modern experience and how close it is and how far removed it is. And the author was English teacher, a high school English teacher, if I'm not mistaken, or she's she's a classics teacher, and so not that like you need to be, but it's just not some like schlub off the road, but I'm like, I've heard of the Iliad.
Sure.
Like this is somebody whose like degree is in this thing, and her job is to tell stories, and like she really or to teach stories, and so she really combined them together really effectively, and so I absolutely read those.
That's awesome. I really like that. And I love that she brings that experience of being a teacher, being a high school teacher, and probably spent many years formulating these ideas before she finally wrote them down. I love that. That's such a cool. That is such a cool perspective for her to have to then write these books.
I'm going to step over you just for a second because it kind of ties in the wave of like mythological stuff that I was reading. I also read Michael Crichton's Eaters of the Dead. Do you remember this book? Have you ever heard of this book?
I don't know. I don't know of it.
No. Well, you know Michael Crichton,
Of course,
I would
I know
assume.
Michael Crichton,
yes.
yeah.
Jurassic Park,
yeah,
Andromeda
Lost
Strain.
World, yeah,
all that stuff. So, Timeline. So he wrote this book called Eaters of the Dead, which was a movie about it was a book that became a movie with Antonio Banderas called The 13th Warrior.
Oh, okay.
But I had never read the book because I remember I saw The 13th Warrior and I was like, okay, it's Vikings and something, and that's all I remember. And so I was like, I'll try the book. It's short, and I like Michael Crichton. And again, it's not just like it's about I can't remember his name now, so forgive me, but it's about a real life. It's a real life Middle Eastern explorer, traveler, and he meets up with the Norsemen, and like it's his journal as he's going through the thing. But that actually happened. That is like a real journal where this guy like wrote all this stuff down and blah blah blah, and so it's one of the first actual accounts of the Abin Fadlan, that's his name. Sorry, I had to look it up. And so he's a courtier, and he's like, he spends all this time with the Vikings, and this is what they're like, blah blah blah, and it's written as almost like a historical document, where like Michael Crichton will like annotate in it, like he'll be like, or he as the author will annotate stuff like, oh, he means this, and this is a thing, and this history book, this. But the cool part is that it's actually just Beowulf.
Oh my gosh.
So it's like this guy meets up with these Vikings, and he meets all these warriors and blah blah blah, and all of a sudden like it starts to creep in where you meet like the Beowulf and this and that, and you go through and all of a sudden you're talking like they're like, oh, this is Hrothgar, and they're like, oh, his hall's too big, that's why the monsters are coming for him because he's just about the gods and like all this, but it's like if Beowulf actually happened story, so it's not like the giant monster isn't real, and so like the serpents in the water, maybe they're whales, maybe they're not. Like it was so cool because I love Beowulf. So
you do,
and just like this outsider, third party, objective perspective of Beowulf, very much like the Song of Achilles in some ways. Though I would not call, actually, it's not objective at all. That's very subjective. But the author or the narrator, but yes. I thought it was just terrific, and so I would lump all those three together.
Nice, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see how those things connect. That sounds super interesting. I that's so, and it's for adults, right? It's not like it's a.
It's definitely for adults. So it's definitely for adults.
Because I feel like there are plenty of examples of it's like, oh yeah, The Lion King is Hamlet, like right?
Sure.
You have that.
Yeah,
where it's like,
it is the broad strokes. Yeah,
right. But I don't know how often that they do that where it's like it's the same story, but it's for adults, not for kids. It's not a retelling for kids where we change the names out. Like at least they're not examples that I have consumed a lot of where it's like, no, this is just straight up this piece of classical literature, but we made it, we changed it's Romeo and Juliet, but with modern names. And
it's Romeo and Juliet. Yes. Yeah. Something. Yeah. Right. I mean, we see that. I mean, Titanic is just Romeo and Juliet. Like that's probably that's probably like The Lion King as close as you can get, right? That's like a similar example, but this is more like, remember that King Arthur movie from the early 2000s, like the Disney one with Clive Owen and Keira Knightley? It's kind of like that. It's like although that one was like if King Arthur was real, and like it wouldn't be like that. Right. But it would be more like we're pretending that it's history. I was trying to think of something else that's like it, and I couldn't place it when I finished the book, and I'm sure there is something else rather like it, but it started as a I guess like a bet. Like someone was like, I bet you couldn't do this, and he's like, oh yeah, I'll show you. So, but yes, definitely check out Song of Achilles, Circe, and Eaters for the Dead.
Solid.
Give me one more thing that you read, Frank.
I'll give you one more. Getting back into the pretentious area. Actually, no. You know what? We'll close something not that pretentious. I've been reading. I haven't finished this yet, but I have been reading a book about Mother Teresa. Somebody who I think we could all be a little bit more like. It's called Something Beautiful for God. This was written while she was still alive, so it's not like a biography of her whole life. It touches on the broad strokes of she was from Albania, she felt a calling to become a sister, she went to India, like they cover on the broad strokes. But it's a really interesting perspective. It's written by a guy called Malcolm Muggeridge, who was a British TV commentator. He did lots of he was sort of like a I can't believe I'm blanking on his name right now. David Attenborough. He was sort of that kind of figure. Mm-hmm. Older British guy who did lots of TV things. Attenborough now does all the Planet Earth type of stuff. But Malcolm Muggeridge was a skeptic and was not a very spiritual person. And over the course of his life, gradually met people like Mother Teresa through interviewing them for the BBC. And he gradually became religious. And by the time he died, he was quite a devout believer in Christianity, but sort of like a Tolkien type of a guy, or a C.S. Lewis type of a guy, where it's especially C.S. Lewis maybe, where it sort of started out more skeptical and then became religious over the course of his life.
Yeah, that's definitely not Tolkien.
No, not Tolkien. No, that's more C.S. Lewis. And I love that he wrote this book when he was sort of still on the edge of whether or not he believed in God and things like that. And he was moved so much by Mother Teresa. So and I'm coming at it obviously with my perspective of I do believe in God. And I admire Mother Teresa very much, but it was interesting to read about someone who was skeptical of her, meeting her, talking about his experience interviewing her for the BBC, and everything that came after that, and all the great reception that interview got, and how people, I guess this wasn't a very common thing for there to be like reruns of things like a documentary or an interview or something like that. But people liked it so much that they begged the BBC to air it again. And the way that he watched her touch people around her in the few days that he was filming with her. It's a short book. It's less than 200 pages, maybe 150 pages. And I just started a few days ago, and I'm like maybe halfway through it. I've just been reading it, like I said, on my lunch hours and that kind of thing. But it's a really good read, and it's a really thought-provoking. As somebody, whether you're Christian or not, we can all agree Mother Teresa was a pretty good person who did some, changed a lot of lives and inspired a lot of people to do some pretty great things. And it's really cool to see someone who was skeptical of her and was sort of looking for like, what's the catch with this lady? His gradual just sort of like, I think she might be the real deal. I think she might actually believe what she's saying.
Actually kind of reminds me of the Mr. Rogers movie. So
yes.
Because that guy is the same. I can't remember his name, but the guy writing the article was kind of like, what's the deal with this guy? And by the end, he was like, he's actually just a nice person.
Yes.
Sorry.
It's kind of like that. It is a lot like that. Yeah, the Tom Hanks Mr. Rogers movie. Yes, that is a very good comparison. It's a very similar story, and it's so far I'm I'm still working through it, about halfway through it, but I really, really am enjoying it. So that's less pretentious. And that's somebody that we all, I think most people listening to this probably remember when Mother Teresa was alive. I'm sure some of our younger listeners, maybe that she's a...
She came to my hometown.
Did she really? That's
yeah,
cool.
when I was alive.
That's cool. Did you
Mm-hmm.
see her from a distance or anything like that?
I don't remember how old I was, so no.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But yeah, very cool. So Something Beautiful for God is the name of that book. And yeah, it is. And in fact, he opens the book being like, Mother Teresa told me very, very specifically not to write a biography of her that was like praising her and saying how great she was. So this is not going to be that. Like he up front was like, she forbid me to do that. So this is not what kind of book this is.
Give him the dirt.
Yeah, she was sort of like, I'm not, she was still alive, and she was like, I'm no saint, and it's like, actually, well, now you're considered one, but she was sort of like, just write about what I do. Don't put a lot of fluff around it and say how great I am, because I'm not authorizing you to do that. I'm just authorizing you to write about the work I do, and yeah, great story of a great person. Cool. So that's my last one for today.
Frank, where can the people find us?
Yeah, there's just so many places you can find us at beerwithgeeks.com, at beerwithgeeks on Twitter, beerwithgeeks@gmail.com. And of course, if you want to rate and review us in places like iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn.com, Amazon, Google, all the places where you can find beers. I just dropped my beer. All the places where you can find podcasts, you will find Beer with Geeks. So please rate and review us there, follow us there, tell your friends, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thoughtbubbleaudio, and we would love to hear from you. So thank you for listening every week, and we'll see you next week.
Well, that's great, Frank. Well, and then until next time,
cheers.
Cheers.